Today, the United States is the wealthiest and most powerful nation in history. But in the early days of European exploration, the continent that would become America was a secondary concern. For more than a century after its discovery, the major empires completely bypassed it. Christopher Columbus thought he could reach Asia by sailing west, but instead bumped into the Caribbean islands. To avoid fighting over these new lands, Spain and Portugal simply snapped a line right down the middle of a map, dividing the globe between them. The Spanish immediately headed south. They found heavily populated territories loaded with gold and silver, and spent their time conquering their half of the world. They sent one expedition north in 1539, but found no precious metals, leaving North America branded as a useless wasteland. The English showed up late to the race. After a few failed attempts and decades of waiting, they finally managed to establish permanent settlements. Eventually, immigrants flooded in, and a string of 13 distinct British colonies took root along the East Coast. The territory that would become the United States began as a collection of colonial leftovers that no one else prioritized. By 1754, the population of those British colonies had surged past 1 million people. As they expanded and bumped up against French territory in the middle of the continent, the two empires, along with various Native American tribes, fought a war to determine territorial control. Britain won, but they drained their treasury to do it. To recoup the financial cost, the British government began levying aggressive new taxes on the colonists, who were furious that they had no voting representation in Parliament. The colonists refused to accept the new taxes. The financial disagreement turned into an armed conflict, and by July 4, 1776, it escalated into a formal declaration of independence. They won their freedom, but the new nation immediately started failing. The government they had set up was disorganized, leaving the 13 colonies to act like 13 separate independent countries that struggled to cooperate. Realizing the system was collapsing, the founders went back to the drawing board. They wrote a new constitution, creating a functional federal government to bind the states into a single entity. But fixing their government didn't change their geographic reality. The United States was a tiny strip of land boxed in by massive European empires on all sides. To survive as a nation, they had to expand. This chart shows the demographic pressure the young country faced. The American population was doubling every 20 years. The average family had 7 children, and all those people needed somewhere to live, forcing them to look past the borders of the original 13 states. They found a solution when Napoleon was planning to invade Britain and desperately needed cash. To fund his war, he sold the massive Louisiana territory to the Americans for $15 million, instantly doubling the size of the United States. A few years later, they pulled out their wallets again, paying the Spanish Empire to formally hand over the Florida Peninsula. This massive expansion relied on sheer luck and opportunistic checkbook diplomacy rather than military conquest. Soon, American settlers moved into Texas, a territory controlled by Mexico. The settlers quickly outnumbered the locals, broke free from the Mexican government, and formed their own independent republic. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas. Border disputes quickly led to a war, forcing Mexico to hand over its northern territories. Combined with an agreement that secured the Oregon Territory from the British, America now stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But absorbing all this land created a crisis. The northern and southern states were locked in a decades-long dispute over whether slavery would be legal in these massive new western territories. When Abraham Lincoln won the presidency in 1860, southern states believed he would abolish the practice. In response, they seceded from the Union and formed their own country. The result was the American Civil War. Hundreds of thousands of people died before the North secured victory, leading to the abolition of slavery and the forceful reunification of the states. This rapid push to span the continent nearly broke the nation, as the internal fight over the new land turned into a war that almost permanently destroyed the Union. After the war, the government went right back to buying land, securing Alaska from the Russian Tsar for a little over $7 million. It was the last great continental real estate bargain. With the continent settled, Americans started looking across the oceans. A legal loophole called the Guano Islands Act allowed U.S. citizens to claim uninhabited islands covered in bird droppings to mine for fertilizer. They didn't stop at remote islands. American businessmen staged a takeover of the Hawaiian Islands, an independent kingdom with strategic value in the Pacific, and eventually convinced the United States to formally annex the territory. This triggered a debate in Washington. The president argued that a law-abiding nation shouldn't overthrow weaker countries, but military strategists feared that if America didn't seize these islands, rival empires like Germany or Japan would take them instead. Having run out of land to settle on the continent, the machinery of American expansion shifted toward global interests. At the time, Cuba was fighting for independence against Spain. American newspapers favored the revolutionaries, and when a U.S. warship sank in an explosion off the coast, the government had the excuse it needed to intervene. The United States demanded that Spain leave Cuba. When Spain declared war in response, the U.S. military defeated them, capturing Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines in a matter of months. Following an assassination, Theodore Roosevelt became president. He immediately set to work building up the second-largest navy in the world to project American power across the globe. To ensure that fleet could quickly move between the Atlantic and Pacific, Roosevelt used aggressive political maneuvering to secure land in Central America. By 1914, the United States finished building the Panama Canal. As World War I broke out in Europe, America's status as a global power represented the culmination of a 423-year campaign to endlessly redraw the map of the world.